But the big one that really forced us to develop some meat inspection protocols was with pork and the parasite that causes trichinosis.
Hello, me folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. My name is Mr. Nahari. I'm a humble host today. We have someone that I admire, someone that I've met when I was at K-State during my master's. I think it was a HACCP class that I took with Dr. Boyle. It was an invited lecture, and I think from there, I think that was in 2016. Happy to call him a friend, a pastor, co-advisor, a lot of things, mentor. Welcome, Dr. Justin Kastner.
Yeah, thank you. So good to be with you, Paco.
So you're teaching classes right now. You're a professor at K-State. We're talking about, like, do you look at many things? I mean, you're teaching in the vet school, public health, international trade, food safety. And we always talk about this multidisciplinary approach. That is also a class that I took with you a few years ago. But I think we have some topics to cover today, and especially we're going to talk about this book written by Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. I know we've discussing some things about food safety, but I think it's time to talk about some of the history in food safety in the U.S., but also worldwide. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I love talking about history, whether I'm teaching a course for veterinary students looking at issues related to international trade policy, or lecturing to the undergraduate students that I meet who are pursuing the Bachelor's of Science in Public Health. I oftentimes emphasize history, historical perspectives, whether that be the history of cooperation, for instance, between veterinarians, physicians, and other health professionals involved with, amongst other things, food safety. But also, I think there's a lot that can be learned outside of the food system regarding the social, economic, and political happenings that actually end up affecting how we think about, and in the case of the jungle, regulate the food system.
Tell us a little bit about the story of the book. Why was it written? And because what happened more than 100 years ago is affecting us today in a good way. We have one of the best food safety systems in the world here in the United States. So I think we can start from there to kind of go deeper. And I like this phrase that I learned from you, going from the known to
the unknown.
To the unknown.
Yeah, well, let's begin with the known. So the known for us here in Kansas is there's a small town in southeast Kansas called Girard. Girard. Not everyone in Kansas has heard of Girard, but Girard, Kansas was the home for an early days publication by some political activists. And that journal, or that magazine, was called The Appeal to Reason. And it was really kind of the mouthpiece for political activists who had aligned themselves with the late 19th century, early 20th century socialist movement. So this was a movement that was not only in the United States. You see this in continental Europe, you see this in Britain, you see this in Ireland. And that movement had different publications. People making political commentary, people writing opinion pieces about what ought to be done in government or society. One of the authors of one of the stories that appeared in the Appeal to Reason was Upton Sinclair. So Upton Sinclair had actually grown up on the East Coast. I think he spent some time in Baltimore, spent some time in New York. He was definitely, mentored in terms of his writing, early days of writing there on the East Coast. But during the early 20th century, many in the heart of America, most notably agriculturalists who were kind of struggling to make a living with the ongoing march of industrialization, all the economic changes that were happening rather quickly, and really the changes that led to the modern day labor movement that we see in places like the United States. That reality was pretty pronounced in the Midwest. And so that's why you had this, oddly enough, in Kansas of all places, a socialist newspaper out of Girard, Kansas, being sent to subscribers all across the country. And Upton Sinclair writes this year-and-a-half long serial, so serial like S-E-R-I-A-L, like a series, not the cereal that I had for breakfast this morning, but a serial story that is fictitious, but is designed to highlight the goings-on in the Chicago meatpacking industry at that time. Okay, so he has a character who features prominently in this, and he's a Lithuanian immigrant who, like many immigrants, had come to Chicago during the late 19th, early 20th century to start a new living, and found themselves working either in the steel sector or the food processing sector, in this case, the meatpacking industry. And that character, Jurgis Rudkus, experiences all the drama that Sinclair writes about in his story to kind of highlight the bad practices of the Chicago meatpacking industry. And those bad practices that Sinclair was most concerned about were really labor practices, the treatment of immigrants, the treatment of labor, not paying them enough, working long hours, excruciating conditions. But along the way, Sinclair also just incidentally mentions some rather grotesque, almost horror movie-like depictions of the lack of sanitation in those meatpacking facilities, and that features in the story. And we can come on to it later, but that captures the attention of some of the politicians, including, not in the least, President Theodore Roosevelt, who are keen to kind of bring a new regulatory approach to the meat sector in the United States.
And I think to help understand our listenership, what was happening in those years in the United States?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so Sinclair writes the serial For the Appeal to Reason from, I believe, late 1904, finishes in 1906, and then it's actually put together as a kind of compendium book in 1906, and that's really when it becomes really well known. And even, you and I each have our own personal copies of The Jungle, as do many students of history, many students of food science. But what was going on even in the decades prior to 1906, you had a really quick kind of amping up of production in the United States. The United States, I believe, 1880, 1890, our population was maybe only 30 or 40 million people. So we were growing, but we also had a surplus agricultural production capacity. And so we were growing wheat and we were producing meat, much of that being exported out of the United States to even faster growing population areas like Great Britain and continental Europe. And so that kind of export focus that the United States had during the decades running up to 1906 actually, in my opinion, kind of laid the groundwork for what Sinclair kind of finishes. Because actually, the continental European countries, as early as the 1870s and 1880s, and Great Britain, with respect not so much to food safety, but other animal diseases, especially a particular lung ailment in cattle, were throwing the flag on us, on the United States, and saying, you need to clean up your practices. You have animal disease issues, you've got food safety threats, and we don't want to just be importing that without refereeing it. And so they required us, the United States, to enact as early as 1890 new meat inspection laws. So many people say that the jungle was the reason why we have a meat inspection law. and why we have the Pure Food and Drug Act. Well, it is true that after President Roosevelt and all the politicians in Washington decide to adopt new regulation, that they passed the 1906 and 1907 Pure Food and Drug Act and Federal Meat Inspection Act. But 16 years earlier, there's a Meat Inspection Act enacted by the U.S. Congress for the express purpose of satisfying some of the concerns that the Europeans who were importing our products had. And amongst those issues, Paco, were diseases like contagious bovine pleuropneumonia in cattle, which was a real problem, not to humans, but for the productive capacity of herds, both in the United States and in Britain. There were concerns about foot and mouth disease, classical swine fever, but the big one that really forced us to develop some meat inspection protocols was with pork and the parasite that causes trichinosis, the human ailment trichinosis, that food safety threat that really kind of we don't think about so much anymore, but was a major concern, had pretty high prevalence in pigs in the late 19th century.
Yeah, and one of the reality is, and I think in some of your classes, I remember that transition from going to sending livestock to Europe, to Great Britain, we kind of went back and forth to now we got these diseases rising, and you need to start killing the livestock at the port. Correct. Right? I think we're going off the tangent, but it's good to have a good foundation of where this started.
Yeah, that's true. And that shows you, as I know that you value in your podcast series here at MeatsPad, that technology has a lot to offer, doesn't it? And with respect to controlling these diseases of concern that the European Union, or not the European Union, that's a modern day geopolitical entity, the Europeans and the British were concerned about, as well as animal welfare activists were concerned about. They said, could we, instead of sending diseased animals across the Atlantic as an exported product, could we have those animals, beef, sheep, hogs, processed on the U.S. side, and then with refrigeration technology, which was relatively increasingly sophisticated in the late 19th century, could we then send the dead meat over and not spread animal diseases? And that was a major, major achievement that helped resolve trade disputes, but also brought peace of mind to those animal welfare activists who were concerned and legitimately concerned about the maltreatment of animals being shipped live on the Atlantic.
This is fantastic because I remember seeing some pictures that in the very first containers or shipments, the meat was in barrels, right? I remember some pictures in the history, and that's even before vacuum packaging, right? Sending subprimals or primals on vacuum packaging. So it's interesting how it started that way, and it's been improving in to date, like we spoke.
Yeah, and I might just add, curiously enough, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but maybe there's one person who will find this useful, a useful or perhaps useless piece of trivia, even going back decades earlier to the War of 1812. There was a meat packer who packed in barrels meat, salted meats for the U.S. Army. Of course, the U.S. was fighting the British during the War of 1812, and to indicate that these barrels of salted meats were for the U.S. Army, he put U.S. on the barrels. But incidentally, his name was also Sam Wilson. And although he meant to put U.S. on there to indicate United States, people learned that there was this meat packer named Sam Wilson providing the rations for the U.S. Army, and that's where we get the phrase Uncle Sam.
Yeah, I'll put the picture right here. That's what we're talking about right now. Yeah, this is amazing. I think we can go to a lot of topics, but I think I would like to at least finish. So this book is published. Then what happens?
Yeah, so as I said, Sinclair kind of finishes work that had already begun, and that's actually I know that you care about leadership as a science and business mind and leader. I think one of the most meaningful quotes I have ever heard in kind of the leadership realm is that some of us start what others will finish, and others of us will finish what others have started. The idea that it isn't just about one person achieving something. We're actually all kind of picking up each other's work to do good, whether that's in the food system, in our communities, in society, whatever. And to the extent that you consider the regulatory changes of 1906 and 1907 being good, and I would say they definitely have been good. They've been good for public health and food safety. They've also been good for the international trade reputation of the United States. But because of the work that had been done as early as I said in 1890, Congress enacting some new inspection laws, beginning to do things like microscopically inspect pork for the export trade. And then there is the Spanish-American War, which takes place in Cuba. And there is this military unit called the Rough Riders, who are led by this emerging leader, Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt leading this military unit, the Rough Riders, they get alarmed by how unsafe and unwholesome the military rations are that they're being provided during the war, during the Spanish-American War. And that kind of is filed away by by Theodore Roosevelt. And then later when he becomes President Teddy Roosevelt, he is kind of ready to take some kind of action to clean up the bad practices in the food industry. And then when he sees Sinclair's story, The Jungle, he has kind of what he needs politically. He has social ammo, if you will, because now lots of people are reading The Jungle, not only those that are interested in the socialist movement, but other people who are just concerned about sanitation. And they begin to speak to their representatives, their senators, and there's kind of this opportunity to pass new legislation in Congress and sign that into law. And that's where we get the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Federal Meat Inspection Act happening in 1906, 1907. And had you not had, in my opinion, the preliminary work done in the late 1800s to satisfy those export markets, had we not had the future president, Theodore Roosevelt, not experienced what he experienced during the Spanish-American War with the unwholesome rations, we maybe wouldn't have enough political ammo with this book, but it all added together and kind of pushed the legislation over the hill, if you will. And that's why we have, in the case of the Federal Meat Inspection Act, one of the longest in effect laws that really affects everyday life in America, and it dates back to 1907.
Do you recall what this is again an off tangent question but related? Do you recall, and it's okay if you don't know, the first meat science or food science program in the States, like when they started looking at like from research? Do you have that in your mind, like close?
Well, I believe that in the dairy sector, we have, I think it's a fat quality test, the Babcock test, I believe. And that was, I could be wrong, I think that was developed either in New Hampshire or Vermont. So one of there's a whole host of what we at Kansas State call land-grant universities. But even before the land-grant universities, there were some pretty sophisticated food chemistry, and even though we didn't really have the germ theory of disease for microbiology until 1876, what we would call microbiological analyses going on of the food system. but I think it was mainly in the Northeast. I could be wrong.
And so what I'm trying to get, and we're getting to the end of this episode. I would love to continue, but I think I think we need to have some empathy and understand the population kind of mindset, right? And we can talk a little bit about the meatpacking industry. We didn't have any. I mean, now that we have a lot of programs for recall, right? When someone gets ill, and you have this traceability system to see to kind of evaluate how many products are being manufactured and on. I mean, it puts me back a little bit and think we didn't have that 100 years ago, and we didn't have perhaps the best practices in terms of sanitation. So there might have been a lot of people get sick for some kind of foodborne disease, but since we were not monitoring, if you will, I mean, no one knew. Okay, I got sick because there was some wrong practices in the meat packing, or like in the book says, picking up meat from the floor. Like some. I mean, it's interesting to kind of understand the history and the evolution of food safety that we have.
Yeah, and of course, all of this is driven by awareness and appreciation of risk. If you don't necessarily appreciate or aware of the risks, there is no, kind of chorus call for regulation. I mean, you can go back millennia to, say, the Roman Empire. I mean, you had communities where, for instance, you had the triclinium kind of dining areas of Roman homes. What in the Roman Empire would have been relatively wealthy homes, okay, having out for long periods of time meat that they had, they had left out with all the environmental exposures, temperature abuses, etc. And of course, that's not being actively regulated until much later, but that's because there was no sophisticated scientific awareness. Now, they did have an understanding of the need for preventing spoilage, which probably had an incidental secondary benefit for protecting health and food safety. But everything is driven by awareness. And when we think about what was going on in 1906, it is important to note that although, without a doubt, there were bad practices going on in Chicago, there were people who immediately after Sinclair wrote his story kind of came to the defense of the whole meat industry. Okay, and one of those people was, surprise, surprise, one of the great patriarchs of the Armour Company. Okay, I think his name was J. Ogden Armour. I could have his name wrong, but he immediately after The Jungle's written and published and sent all across the country, he authors his own kind of treatise book, really defending the fact that the meat industry was trying to do its best job to feed growing frontier America as well as urban America. And that, and we know this, and you know this better than I because you're in the business, but to feed large numbers of people, especially people who are concentrated in urban centers, requires a lot of business machinery. I mean, that's just the reality. And not to take anything away from the bad practices of the Chicago meat industry and the need for those wrongs to be righted, there were also at the same time some sincere efforts to increase the reach of the beef production system, for instance, in the United States and around the world. And that was being done to satisfy those consumer demands.
Yeah. And it's amazing how this 100 years ago and now we see today, what would Upton Sinclair think if he was like right now in the U.S.?
Well, he very famously said, because he wrote this book to advance a political agenda that was really about socialism, not food safety, okay? And he tried to make his story about Jurgis Rudkus reveal how the working class had been given a bad social contract, and there needed to be a different way. And one of those ways was through unionization and socialism, etc. So he actually said when he saw that President Roosevelt and all these people are really more interested in the food safety side of his story, he said this. He said, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, I hit it in the stomach." Which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, that's a good way to end this podcast, this episode. Thank you a lot. We definitely we have some other topics, like we had the other book. We didn't have a chance to go over that. The Servant. That's another one by James Conner. And talk about international trade in the near future as well. Thank you a lot for being here on MeatsPad.
Thank you so much. Thanks.